When you're mixing multiple songs and albums like I am, getting vocals to sound polished without hours of tedious edits can feel almost impossible. I've faced those same challenges, endlessly adjusting pitch, aligning takes, and watching valuable creative time slip away on technical tasks rather than actually mixing my music. But I've recently found two plugins that have completely transformed my editing workflow: VocAlign and RePitch from SynchroArts. These tools make vocal editing faster, easier, and much more precise, letting me achieve transparent, natural-sounding vocals without all of the hassle. RePitch is an intuitive vocal tuning plugin that offers extensive control and delivers clear, natural-sounding results. With RePitch, I can adjust pitch, timing, levels, and vibrato to make precise, expressive edits, all while maintaining a natural, authentic vocal sound that isn't robotic. Unlike other tuning tools I've tried, RePitch doesn't sound overbearing or heavy-handed. It allows me to dial in exactly what I'm hearing in my head quickly and intuitively. Meanwhile, VocAlign, as the name suggests, is an alignment tool that's truly one of a kind. With just a few clicks, it aligns and times multiple vocal tracks so they're perfectly in sync with one another. This has been a game changer for tightening up vocal doubles, harmonies, and other intricate vocal layers that need to sync up seamlessly. Before VocAlign, aligning takes word by word or phrase by phrase was time-consuming and tedious, but now I can achieve tight, cohesive vocal layers almost instantly in just a few clicks, as I'm going to show you momentarily. Overall, incorporating these two tools into my workflow has helped me spend less time tweaking and more time on the creative side of mixing. Together, they're now an essential part of my process for achieving professional vocal quality without the usual time sync or guesswork. In this video right here, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I like to use these plugins to make my editing workflow smoother and more efficient. Along the way, you're going to get a better understanding of why I recommend these tools in the first place and why you may want to consider trying them yourself. I've left links to both plugins down in the description and pinned comment below, where you can also access a free trial and evaluate if these plugins are the right fit for you. Let's start with VocAlign, which is honestly so easy to use and delivers impressive results quickly. For example, let's take a look at these two vocal takes here, which you're going to see are ultimately not perfectly in time with one another, even though they're doubles of each other. Check this out as I play it and listen to those timing differences between them. And I've also panned them so you could really hear that difference.
This is gonna take a while, should've hit by now. I hold back a smile, how till I drown. This is gonna take a while, should've hit by now. I hold back a smile, how till I drown.
Now, what you're hearing is quite common when stacking vocals. Rarely will an artist perform each take identically, and very often there's going to be some timing differences between takes, even if it's just subtle ones. We can ultimately use VocAlign to sync these vocals up so they don't sound as disjointed and instead work together in unison. To do that, we're first going to open up VocAlign in general, and for me, since I'm on Pro Tools, I am going to be using the ARA version of this plugin, but it's also going to be accessible as an audio suite version of the plugin if you're on an older version of Pro Tools, or typically as an insert if you're on a different DAW altogether. So to do that, I'm just going to go here and select VocAlign Pro for both of these, and you're going to see this window populate on the bottom. And inside, you're going to see really there's three main rows that we're going to focus on: the guide, the dub, and the output. The guide is the track that you want to have your other tracks synced to. In some ways, this is almost like the master track in terms of timing and what you want the other track to be timed like. The dub track is the track that you want to have retimed, aligned, and synced with the guide track. The output is ultimately what you get after the dub is synced to the guide. In other words, it's the dub track aligned to match the timing of the guide track. To start this whole process, we need to first capture our guide. As I mentioned, there's two tracks here, so we need to pick one to ultimately act as the guide. And in this case, I'm going to choose the top one to be the guide, and then use the second one, the bottom one, as the dub, which will ultimately be the one that gets moved in timing. In saying that, I'm going to select the guide track, which is the top one as I mentioned, and all I'm going to do is hit capture. Right away, you're going to see that it's going to show the file name of the track that I just captured, EJ55 before. From there, I'm going to navigate to the second track, which is this bottom one here, and I'm going to go to dub and hit capture on that. And you're going to see it's going to now populate the file name for that as well, EJ66 before 2. So we have our guide locked in, which is the top one. The bottom one was the dub that I just grabbed, and now that dub is going to be moved and repositioned to now align better in timing with that top guide track. If I expand this a little bit and scroll all the way to the end, which is the outro that I was playing before, now where the output is populated, you can see a yellow outline which indicates indicates the original guide track, and then the new aligned version of the dub in purple. I can also expand these waveforms if I want to get a better visual, and that should actually help us see what's going on a little bit better. Now, while the output's actually showing the changes to the timing of the waveform, we can scroll over to the show pitch area, and if you can't see it, you can just press these I buttons here, and it'll actually show the variations and changes being made to the pitch. So yes, this plugin is not only adjusting timing between these two tracks, but also adjusting the pitch to better match them. Navigating back to our original waveform view, you may be wondering, how exactly do we control how these two tracks are aligned in relation to one another? There's a few methods, but the easiest one is to simply use a preset, which you can see I already have one preloaded from the moment that we started this whole process. By clicking on this drop down, you can see quite a few different options here, from slightly loose timing all the way to doubles with some tighter timing as well. And to be honest, I typically like to use the tighter timing preset, this one right here. And when I do that, it actually just quickly reloaded our output and adjusted how things were aligned. And before we even explore some of the more advanced options here, let's just quickly play this and see what it sounds like right now with just this simple preset and everything captured loaded in.
This gon' take a while, should've hit by now. I hope I could smile, how long till I drown? This gon' take a while, should've hit by now. I hope I could smile, how long till I drown?
Clearly much tighter than where we initially started. However, if we want to have even more manual control over how these two tracks are aligned, we can take a look at some of the additional controls that VocAlign has to offer. And what I'm referring to is this area on the right side of the screen here, which if it's not open for you from the moment you open this plugin, you can essentially click these three buttons and it's going to expand and show everything. And you can see that there is specifically an area for timing, an area for pitch, and then some additional other controls. Now, I just want to point out that I was talking about pitch earlier, it wasn't on. I'm going to turn that on, and now these two tracks are actually going to match the pitch and be better aligned in terms of not only timing, but also pitch as well. Now, when you select a preset, it ultimately adjusts these controls for you. However, you can still go in and manually adjust them as you see fit. So for example, I could change the timing to make it more loose or make it more tight, and you can see how the output is adjusting each time I adjust one of these. The same would go for the pitch. Now, the truth is you don't necessarily need to manipulate all of these, but they can ultimately give you more control and help control the degree of timing and pitch alignment between your two tracks if you see fit. And while I'm not going to go super deep into each of the parameters, SynchroArts has a lot of detailed videos and a manual dedicated to these timing and pitch parameters, so I'll link to that in the description below to avoid boring you with all the details and nuances of each setting. But I know for me personally, after capturing the guide and the dub tracks, I'm typically just relying on a preset as I showed you, and then if anything, I might adjust these slightly, specifically the knobs in particular, in order to just adjust that timing difference and arrive at a tighter sounding result. I'm often also sticking with all of the default modes that I'm given, but every once in a while I might adjust something and go a little bit deeper if I really need to. That being said, let's do a quick before and after. I'm going to play the track once again as we started, and then I'll put it in with the VocAlign. You can hear the difference between them.
This gon' take a while, should've hit by now. This gon' take a while, should've hit by now. I hope I could smile, how long till I drown? This gon' take a while, should've hit by now. I hope I could smile, how long till I drown?
Now, an important final note is once I'm happy with the timing between these tracks, what I like to do is commit them so then that way my edits are locked in and I don't necessarily need to worry about things getting moved or changed later by accident. To do that, I'm going to just right click on my track, navigate to VocAlign Pro, and click Render. You're going to see it's now going to replace this track with my newly timed version that is obviously much more in sync than the initial one that I had. So let's shift gears and now take a look at RePitch Pro and how I'd use that to tune vocals in a session. For this example, I've got RePitch applied as an ARA plugin on my lead vocal here. However, you could still use RePitch as an insert on a track if desired as well, and the general workflow we're about to walk through will apply regardless of how exactly you're accessing the plugin. That being said, from the moment that I open RePitch here, you can see that it's already mapped out the vocals pitch across the performance of the track we're affecting. Each part of the performance has effectively been split up into these colored blocks, each representing a different note being sung. Behind each block is the audio waveform itself, and within each of those is the pitch trace, basically showing how the vocal flow flows from one note to another as the waveform and performance progresses. The blue blocks are pitched voicing, so the parts that actually have a pitch and can be adjusted. The green blocks indicate non-pitched voicing, so like S's or breaths. These are often not touched or treated when using RePitch as they don't actually have melodic content that requires tuning. The yellow line within the pitch trace shows how the vocal transitions from one note to the next. If you pay attention to the top left, you can see that RePitch has automatically detected the key for this track, which is B blues. You can also see on the left side which notes the current pitch is corresponding to as it relates to the scale it's identified. If I want, I can also disable the scale and set this back to chromatic or another option if I want to, which will offer greater control if I want to move notes outside of the scale for whatever reason. Now, as we zoom into the actual blocks, you can see that there's 3 blue boxes that appear underneath. The left one controls pitch drift, the middle controls the level, and the right one controls the level of correction. At the top of each block is also a gray box, which can be used to further control the modulation or the range of the note's pitch variation. We also have a bunch of tools we can use to manipulate our pitch correction and pitch drift further in the top area of the interface, and that includes the selector tool, which is really the main tool we're going to be using to grab and reposition our audio pitches, the center notes tool, which can automatically center notes on the closest pitch, the draw tool, which allows you to draw or redraw the pitch trace, the shaper tool, which can add shape points and allows for finer pitch manipulation, great for treating vibrato in particular, the split tool, which will split the note blocks into multiple, allowing you to move words or phrases with even more flexibility, and the warp tool, which allows you to create warp markers and ultimately adjust the timing of blocks as desired. The truth is, you probably won't necessarily need to use all of these tools every single time, but you can hopefully get an idea of how they come into play as we work through correcting pitch and other issues with our audio. Now, before we adjust anything though, let's first play the vocal raw to hear exactly what we're starting with.
If there's some high, there's some low. Who's around? We don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. Will you catch me before you go?
Not bad, but we could definitely tighten things up a bit, especially as you can see when we scroll around that some notes are a bit higher or lower than the pitch they're supposed to be sung on, and some of these may actually not even be on the right pitch at all, and we might need to actually evaluate and fix those. Now, if we want to be as fast as possible, we can use a macro to get started. You can find that by scrolling over to the drop-down list and then picking one of the presets available. A good one that I like to start with is to navigate to the normal pitch range menu and then select snap notes to selected scale. This will effectively take all of the notes being sung and bring them to the pitch center, or 0, making them pitch perfect on the B blues scale in this example. Now, of course, this may not actually be perfect depending on the vocalist's performance, as they may have sung one note when they really should have sung a different one, and we'll talk about correcting that more in a moment, but this is a quick way to get everything to be dead on with the note that was being sung within the performance itself. In saying that, let's now play this vocal now that we've effectively snapped all notes to their 0 center position and see what it sounds like.
If there's some high, there's some low. Who's around? We don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. Will you catch me before you go?
Definitely closer to where we need it to be, but sometimes putting each note into its perfect note center at 100% is just way too perfect, and that can reduce some of that natural human feeling that comes with a vocal performance. There's a few ways around this, but something that I like to do is use the center notes tool, which is the one that looks like a magnet from the control bar, and from there I can highlight all of the notes in the performance, or as many or as few as I need to or choose, and then you're going to see the center note interface appear once the notes are selected. I can now increase or decrease the 2 sliders here to adjust the amount of pitch correction and pitch drift correction being applied to the vocal performance. Because of the preset we used, it's at 100%. While it may be tempting to just keep these at 100 or ramp them all the way to 100, the truth is you probably want to play with them and dial in a more conservative setting that improves the performance, tightening it of course, but without overdoing it. Overdoing it and having things sound too perfect can make a performance sound dull or even less emotive, if that makes sense. So what we can do is take our setting from 100% and then reduce it to a place that's closer to sounding like what we want, but without having everything be aligned 100%. This might be closer to that 70 to 80% range, again, keeping some of that imperfection, but improving it from where we initially started. This will help preserve some of that human feeling once again. Let's do that and see what it sounds like.
If there's some high, there's some low. Who's around? We don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. Will you catch me before you go?
Now that's starting to feel better. However, not all notes are tuned exactly where I want, and there's definitely still some moments that are a bit less natural than I'd prefer, especially towards the end of the performance where I think some notes are not necessarily correct. And that's likely because the artist sang between certain pitches and RePitch found it to be closer to one note than the other, which is ultimately pulling it in a direction that makes sense technically, but was not the intention on the artist's part. I also find this often has something to do with the pitch drift and how phrases can sort of float or transition between notes, even during a single word or phrase. For that reason, I like to manually adjust notes using the selector tool as needed to get them closer to what I'm hearing. That's going to involve me playing the track, listening and identifying what parts sound off still, and then manually moving them to what sounds better. While I'm doing that, it's probably also going to involve using the split tool to better separate words or phrases that float between pitches but have been combined into one by RePitch. I find it easier to identify these moments by paying attention to the pitch trace in particular. Once I split these notes, I'll now have another block which appears closer to the pitch being performed, and I can manually move it as I see fit. Doing this helps me get around adjusting pitch drift, at least at first, as splitting blocks will put each part of the block onto its own pitch that more accurately corresponds to what's being performed. However, if it's too heavy-handed, I could always undo and then focus on manipulating pitch drift alone. In saying that, if I want to be super lazy or just work really quickly, I can use the split tool in conjunction with the center notes tool. Chances are it's going to be a combination of all of these strategies, so let's work with that and pitch things a bit better with it in mind. And truth be told, I'm going to do this for just a few parts of the vocal so you understand what I'm saying, and then I'm going to jump ahead to the final product so that way you don't have to watch me tune this entire vocal step by step.
Will you catch me before you go? 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 If there's some high, there's some low. Who's around? We don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. Will you catch me before you go?
Okay, that's sounding good. And now that I've gotten the pitches mapped out more accurately, I'm going to take a closer look at the pitch drift specifically. Really, I'm listening for the excess vibrato or the wiggle in the vocals, or at least parts that feel like it's too much, as of course vibrato is a natural part of the vocal performance. But once we identify some pitch drift issues that we want to address, the easiest way to adjust them is to utilize the gray box above the block. Alternatively, if you want to be a little bit more manual with it, we can use the draw or shaper tools, but I find that keeping it simple and using the first method with that gray box handles it most of the time for me. But of course, we have that option to go a little bit deeper for those situations that require a bit more finesse. Let's adjust some of that pitch drift modulation now. And just like before, I'm only going to do this for a section of it and then jump ahead to the end so you don't have to watch me do this for the whole performance.
Will you catch me before you go? 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 If there's some high, there's some low. Who's around? We don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. Will you catch me before you go?
So now this is sounding a lot smoother and more importantly more in key or closer to what it should be. We didn't start off too far, of course, and it's still not 100% perfect, but that's on purpose to retain some of that human feeling after all, especially in the context of this crossover R&B rap track, but it certainly improves the overall vocal fidelity and presence as a whole. Now, similar to what I mentioned in the vocal line section of this video, once I have the vocals tuned to my liking, I like to commit it to audio so I can lock in the pitch corrections and focus on the next step of my vocal mixing process. process. And because I'm using RePitch as an ARA plugin, I can simply right-click on my track that I've applied it to, navigate to the RePitch submenu, and then click render for it to render the audio in place with my pitch correction locked in. So now as a final comparison, let's shoot out this vocal with the original vocal before any tuning with RePitch took place.
If there's some high, there's some low. Who's around? We don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. Will you catch me before you go? If there's some high, there's some low. Who's around? We don't know. If you're here, I'll let you watch. Will you catch me before you go? Will you catch me before you go? Will you catch me before you go?
Overall, I'd say it's sounding smoother and more in key while retaining that natural character of the raw vocal performance, and that's exactly what I was after here. I wasn't aiming for an overly robotic tune sound, and that's why RePitch is a great tool to use for those who don't want that obviously pitch-corrected character. If you haven't tried these tools before, I highly recommend you check them out. You can do a free trial, like I said, via the links down in the description and pinned comment below, and you can see for yourself how they'll speed up your workflow and lead to much better sounding results. And while these two tools can really expedite your vocal editing process and help you sound better, I find that vocal editing in general is something that a lot of people sleep on, and chances are this is something that's holding back your mixes from sounding professional. For that reason, I highly recommend you check out my 8 vocal editing mistakes video if you haven't seen it yet. I'm gonna leave it on screen for you to watch next. I appreciate you guys for watching. Please smash that like button if you got value out of the video, and of course subscribe if you're new to see more vocal editing tips and other things like that in the future. I appreciate y'all once again, and I'll see you soon. Peace.
5